What's up, everybody? Nick Powills, publisher of 1851franchise.com. Another episode of Meet the Zor coming up next. This time, we're talking about a multi-brand franchisor, which seems to be a trend. If you like these videos, go ahead and click subscribe. Scott Sutton coming up next. All right, Scott, the first question, which yours, I know what the answer is, but I like to frame the discussions based on how you accidentally fell into franchising. So how did you accidentally fall into franchising?
That, my friend, Nick, first off, thank you for having me. I always get excited to have an opportunity to chat with you about franchising, the journey, my journey, as interesting as it is. This episode is not long enough for me to take you through all the nuances, but long story short, I had an opportunity to engage with a fast food franchisor based in Oklahoma City while I was a student in college. And that was my introduction to franchising as a marketing intern. That turned into an opportunity after college to join a team and to help drive franchise sales in the petroleum sector. So I didn't know it at the time, Nick, but that exposure in college, the opportunity to really start to understand what is franchising, what does it mean, how do people grow, and more importantly, how are folks finding that path to achieve the dream of business ownership? I didn't know at the time. I was learning and understanding that in those early days of internships, but that's where it started. And I've been going strong in franchising ever since.
All right. So how many years has it been now?
It is now officially, this will be that was 1992. So let's do the math. Almost 32 years.
Crazy. So along that pathway, have you considered, or how close have you gotten to looking at actually becoming the franchisee? Because over that course of time, you've welcomed many human beings into business ownership where they're going to build wealth for themselves and for their family. Have you considered it, or how close have you gotten to that decision?
Yeah, I considered it? I have. Have I gotten close to that decision? The answer is no. And there's a very specific reason for that. And it really tracks back to, as I had the opportunity to migrate and move through my career, I had the opportunity to work for some organizations that, Nick, were just incredible organizations to work within, to learn from, and more importantly, to have a really diverse set of experiences. So coming in with more of a marketing business background, getting exposed to incubation and new brand development, then migrating over to mergers and acquisitions, then to general management, then portfolio development. At each stage of my career, I've just been really lucky to work for companies that provided an opportunity for me to do different things in different areas and different channels. And that's been so incredibly stimulating that I've never had a period in my career where I've said, I'm bored. I hate what I do. I'm sick of corporate America, or I'm sick at being on this side of the table. I want to be on that side of the table. Certainly not closing the door on that. And I will tell you that being in a role in a company that helps entrepreneurial minded folks achieve the dream of business ownership, fulfilling, absolutely rewarding every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So I love what I do. And I think that's been the key driver.
This is the second company in a row where you've been at a multi-brand franchisor. What are some of the benefits of having that in your back pocket at either place, just in a general sense of being able to look at data across multiple brands in a very similar, not similar segments, but similar customer base?
Yeah, to me, it's the first and foremost, it's experiential success. And so I look at Empower Brands, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Bumble Roofing, Canopy Lawn Care. These are two brands that were just launched about 90 days ago. We've already had our first trainings of our new franchisees in both of those brands. When you think about the questions that come from the candidates in those two brands, when you think about the confidence that they need to understand and feel as they make the decision to help launch a new brand, one of the things that's important for them to understand, and one of the things that's critical at a portfolio company level, is really this. When we're having a conversation with a candidate that's coming into a new brand or an emerging brand, one of the conversations centers around the experience of the franchisor. Empower Brands has almost 1,400 territories in operation, over 650 franchise owners across 11 brands. Out of that scale, we've been able to develop a shared services organization that understands onboarding, that understands training, that understands technology, marketing, coaching, all of the disciplines in that shared services organization that's come from supporting 650 franchise owners across almost 1,400 territories in operation. So that's the benefit to the candidate, especially when they're coming into a brand that may be emerging. How are you going to support me? How are you going to make sure that as a new franchisee in a new market, in a new brand, that I'm going to have access to experienced resources in key critical areas so that I can be successful? That's what a portfolio company can bring to the table, again, provided that they've been successful in those key disciplines to help franchisees grow. So I know in portfolio organizations, multi-branded franchise companies, that is something that people are hearing more about, seeing evolve in our space more frequently. It's important to dig in and say, well, okay, tell me about the shared services organization and let me understand how deeply experienced is that C-suite, is that leadership team, is that board of directors, to make sure that that experience is there for each franchisor.
As a franchisor, how much of the widget is now established? Meaning, it doesn't really matter what the brand is. You have in essence, you're refranchising your methodology and cross-applying it back to a brand. How much of that is now rinse and repeat, where you could take a brand, really any type of brand in a adjacent segment, and launch them in a productive way?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll frame it this way, Nick, and that is that we're never done, right? The widget is never complete; it's never finished, but there is a substantial amount of institutional knowledge as it relates to incubation, proof of concept, launch, onboarding, training, marketing, coaching, mentoring. That institutional knowledge is here. It has been evolved. I'm never going to say it's been perfected, because I'm not someone just individually and personally that believes we're ever perfected. I think there's always an opportunity to be better. But from an experience perspective, we are at the top in terms of being able to provide real world successes and failures to help frame how and when we're providing the kind of support we are by discipline. So never going to be perfect, but I firmly believe we are exceptional and will continue to be that way, regardless of the brands that we either bring into the portfolio or create and evolve out of the portfolio.
What percentage of deals currently come through the broker network versus organic?
Yeah, great question. We have a great relationship with the consultant organizations that are out in the marketplace. Last year, about 20% of our transactions, the territories that we awarded, were non-consultant based territory sales. So this year, our expectation is about 65% of the territory awards will flow through the consultant organizations. And that's really a result of some of the investment and related focus areas on the non-consultant side, the organic and related paid advertising side of the house. So a substantial number of our territories are coming through the consultant networks. We want to continue to see the number of territories from consultant networks grow. But by percentage, we would expect the percentage to decline as we continue to ramp up on, call it, the non-consultant or organic side.
The argument for the franchise brokerage consultant coach world would be that to someone that is coming to the table and saying, I don't know what I want to buy, here's how much money I have, then they're able to show an inventory, which in turn you have variations of business opportunities that could then align with that person. So in the framework of saying, I don't know what to buy, I need a coach, it totally makes sense. What's interesting to me, like if we go back to your support question as a business, you've engineered a model that shouldn't have to use a franchise broker or consultant because you've built a great business that for whatever reason, and maybe it's the marketing or the outpacing the marketing of a franchisor like you, but you have all the tools to do so. Like you could educate the buyer on what this is. Do you see an end to that? Like eventually, like the buyer is going to not get smarter, but change their approach and go more direct because they know that you're going to be able to tell them exactly what the business opportunity is versus using a third party like a broker. Do you see any line of sight of change that goes more organic over the next few years?
Yeah, here's the way that I think about that. And from my view, we are already implementing strategies to be able to call what we call pivoting our candidates into other brands of interest where there may be a barrier to their preferred brand of interest. So that non-consultant lead enters the funnel. They're interested in a particular brand because it's a category that is non-discretionary, high ticket, not professionalized. We got 3 of those brands. So if somebody comes in because of that market dynamic in a category, but that territory is not available, we now have the in-house manpower, expertise, and process to be able to pivot and flow that candidate into another brand that may have availability that meets some of their market and preferential attributes that they're looking at for a brand. So that system is already in place. I think fundamentally, especially those consultant organizations that are out there that do what they do really well, I believe there will likely always be a market for those consultant organizations to engage with entrepreneurial minded folks in the market that just, Nick, don't know what they want to do. Right? Mm-hmm. They just really don't understand what is franchising. What is a Rob's funding strategy? What's an SBA 7A? Like, I just don't. So I believe that those candidates, that market provides a valuable resource to candidates to be able to help them understand based on your preferences, based on your passion points, based on the things that you want to be doing in your goals over time. Here's a slate of 4 or 5 or 6 different brands across 4 categories that might be a good fit. I think that we're going to continue to see that over time. The interesting question will be to what degree the volume of interest is increasing or decreasing through both of those channels, whether it's a direct channel or a consultant channel. Right. And I don't have any insights to that. My gut tells me that, again, in the near term, there is a place for and likely we'll probably see the same types of percentages across both of those channels in the near term.
Yeah, I mean, a few comments, and obviously any follow-up comments would be great. I agree. I don't think there's going to be a huge shift because franchisors aren't taking the lead on educating the buyer. Like if a franchisor, not necessarily you, but if a franchisor came out and said, "Hey, before we talk about the opportunity, let's actually explain to you what franchising is. Here's what a Rob's loan could look like or impact when it comes to financing your business." Like if the franchisor takes back control of the education, then they win. Ultimately, I could go to 99.9% of franchisors' websites and it goes immediately into the opportunity, which is where when I ask someone, tell me about how you accidentally fell into franchising, everybody accidentally falls into it. And if the follow-up question is, go back to the day before you were in franchising, did you know what it was? It's like, absolutely not. And to these candidates that are even more novice, we're skipping ahead and saying, here's offering. So the coaching is deeply important. the gap that is getting wider from my perspective is the rising franchise fees to offset the cost of doing business. Now, there's two sides to that. One, I think there's a lack of transparency to explaining the buyer, like, this is how much commission they actually get, because they're coming out, some of the consultants come out and say, we help you for free. And the reality is you don't. You get a very large check if they end up buying. And so for you guys, like, the reality is whether the fee was $30,000 or it was $100,000 or it was $200,000, based on all the infrastructure that you've put behind the business, there's still going to be value no matter what. And you don't need that cash flow to keep the lights on. For a non-multi-franchisor that's in the emerging space, they need that cash to keep the lights on. If those lights don't stay on, they don't support the franchisee at the level that they should, which is where, in my opinion, the future has to be, especially in home service, has to be a multi-brand franchisor so that it can offset the cost of doing business. Because if you look at what percentage of the fee of the total investment, it is a significant portion of the total investment. Here, you guys can offset that by the support that you're going to give. Most can't. And so if you're a buyer and you're looking at what type of brand should I be looking at, there is a tremendous advantage to going with the multi-brand franchisor that has all the built-in infrastructure, because you're actually getting a better return on that giant fee that you just paid that most likely went to the franchise broker or consultant. So any comments on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think, and being at the Emerging Franchisor Conference a couple of months ago, I had an opportunity to spend some time in a room with emerging franchisors. And I will tell you that one of the voids, one of the gaps that I continue to identify, and we spent a lot of time talking about this, is from call it an internal development perspective. There are certain discipline areas that are gaps. Really understanding, what is my ICP, right? Really understanding, and the ICP, which in the B2B world is the ideal customer profile. In the franchising world, it's the ideal candidate profile. But understanding who is your candidate, where do they live, where do they trade, what are the triggers that help get them to act, and then how do you shape your offering in a way that resonates with those folks that are most likely to be interested and willing to act on your brand. And that takes some science, it takes some investment, but at the end of the day, we know from a cost of acquisition, if we look at call it organic acquisition cost versus acquisition costs that aren't organic, generally speaking, is going to provide a much lower acquisition cost. The difference is you have to know what you're doing. You have to be aligned on your ICPs, and you have to put that money out on the table before you win the deal. In a consultant-led deal, it's a higher acquisition cost, no doubt about it, but you're putting that money on the table after that deal has been won. Yeah. And I think a lot of times, Nick, especially for an emerging franchisor, right, it is that push and pull and that tug around, do I want to bet on the come, or do I want to pay out a larger amount on the sure thing? And that, I'll tell you, we were in a session for an hour, and I think about 35 to 40 minutes centered around that exclusively.
Yeah, it turns into a available cash to invest into franchising. But I'll say on the flip side, ultimately, a company like Empower, the broker networks know who you are. They know the speed of deal. They know that when they drive a candidate in, you're going to close the deal. And to some of these emerging franchisors that choose to go that route, they might spend the same, table stakes to get to the table, but the broker community looks at them and says, you're not going to give me the resources. You're not going to move this deal fast. Therefore, I'm not going to get my commission fast. Therefore, I'm not going to push you from an inventory standpoint. I mean, my viewpoint is there has to be some sort of cleanup at some point. We did a podcast, Meet the Z, talked with a Z, went through the broker network. They said, look, we had aging parents. Both of us did. We took care of our aging parents. We wanted to be in senior care. And I said, okay, so who did you get presented? They said, we got presented a donut brand, a soccer brand, and a senior care brand. I said, well, why the donut brand and why the soccer brand? They said, well, the consultant told us that this was a match based on our personality. I said, well, the reality is that both of those pay very high commissions. Did you know that? And they said, no. And I said, that's the gap. Like, I think the cost of doing business should be there. Emerging franchisors should be able to enter the broker networks. The candidate who has to be the hero, which obviously you see that on your site here, you're championing the success of our franchisees. The hero has to be the franchisee. It cannot be the broker. It has to be the people that are about to invest their life savings into something. And that's where I think our industry could use a little bit more cleanup, to be a little bit more transparent and set people up for success, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, there's a hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow put that together at the personal level, but I think there's also a business hierarchy of needs. And so when you are emerging, when you are trying to grow your business and add those first 10 franchisees, you're trying to survive. You are in survival mode, and sometimes that shapes your decisions. We do benefit from a substantial track record, very strong brands. We have scale, we have experience. And so some of those needs are met, right? We don't have some of the same very baseline needs to cover that an emerging franchisor would have. So I think it's easy to look over things like alignment and making sure that if you're partnered with a particular consultant network, that you're transparent, communicative, and really consistent on the type of candidate that's going to be most likely to succeed, and succeed for the long term. There is, I think, a natural inclination that if that doesn't exist, that a candidate that's referred, the expectation is you're going to take that candidate through your process and award them a franchise. Yeah. And if you don't do that, then maybe I don't refer future folks. If you cover that on the front end and say, these are my hot markets, this is my ICP, this is the persona of the typical franchise owner that we want to have in our system, either because we have some baseline data based on existing franchise owners, or it's more aspirational based on the persona of the ownership. Fine, get that out there, communicate that. You'll be in a better place. I think at the end of the day, Nick, there's just franchisors and particularly emerging franchisors are so incredibly focused, and rightfully so, right? So incredibly focused on adding franchise owners, getting those people into markets and getting them open, right? That's the most important thing for a lot of franchisors, early stage emerging franchisors. And it's always a fun question to ask, right? To every franchisor, your first 10 franchise owners.
Yeah.
If you had it to do again, would you award territories to those same 10? And I think you get a lot of very interesting answers to that. And in many cases, those answers lean into a very binary focus in the early stages to just get people in the markets.
Yeah, I think franchisors unfortunately have this carrot in front of them because they can see an empower brand, and an empower brand can scale faster because you have a support mechanism that here's how we're going to get the franchisee open. Here's how we're going to support them. Here's the infrastructure we put around them. And so a new franchisor might look at you and say, man, how are you able to sell 100 of these in a year? That's what we need to do. And the reality is 100 to a new franchisor would totally break its back, and it would sink the system, not only for the franchisor, more importantly for all these franchisees that invested into it, because there was no infrastructure behind it. And so sometimes slow and methodical to get those first 10. You don't have to rush it. Like, you're setting up a business that is going to be established, then take the right measures to do so that when you reflect back on that question, the answer is, yeah, I was very happy with the approach we took. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I can remember one of the companies in which I led development, we would come out of the gate, Nick, at the beginning of the year and actually market, we're only awarding 30 territories.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, that's what we're awarding. And once we get to that number, our focus shifts into site selection, build out, grand opening, initial support, so that those 30, and maybe those territories are represented by 20 franchise owners. But those franchise owners, all of our attention is focused on making sure that they're optimized and they're launched in a productive and a successful way. You think about that, that's provocative, I think, in the way that a lot of brands choose to grow, which is, to your point, let's sell as many as we can. And if I sell 100, 80 might open, of those 80, 70 will make it past the first 12 months. I got 70 locations open past the first 12 months without so much of a focus on the 30 that didn't make it. And so I think that can be dangerous for sure. And I would encourage every franchisor, you create a budget. It's almost like a financial budget. We do it at home, right? You do it at home. But you create a budget and say, what's our expectation for openings, right? And franchise owners that we have to support. And what does that mean for the marketing organization, the support organization, the onboarding organization, our tech stack? What does that mean? Because every 10 or 20 franchise owners that are onboarded and open, or said differently, every 10 or 20 franchise owners that sign, you have to make investments in the other disciplines in the company to be able to appropriately support those franchise owners. So everybody loves to be ahead of budget, but if you're ahead of budget in certain areas, it puts pressure on other areas to be able to deliver the kind of support that you have to deliver for emerging and new franchisors out in the market. So I think that's the big challenge when trying to weigh how fast I go compared to how much support is needed, particularly for a new business owner. These are new business owners, many of whom have never owned a business before ever. It's a challenge.
Well, Scott, obviously appreciate the conversation. If I'm a buyer watching this, again, I'm trying to look at the indicators that a franchisor is going to have my back, and it seems like you guys have set up a good structure. So obviously, thanks for doing Meet the Zor. Appreciate it.
Great to be here as always, Nick. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
For Scott, I'm Nick. This is another episode of Meet the Zor. Take care, everybody.